I'm here to talk about some of my own theories, okay? And humans have progressed immensely over the last few centuries. And I've always thought that it was interesting how there's a certain level of fatalism that occurs when we feel ourselves being a part of a millennium. So, for example, fatalism means that you are, that things are just meant to be, like fate. It's fatalism in terms of fate. So we feel like, we're meant to be special, right? We have to be special because, we're in the year 2000, right? We're in 2024, right now. And so we feel like we're special, right? And so the millennium itself, as a calendar, as the numeration of the calendar itself, has an effect on our psychology and what we're doing as a society. So, the year 2000, or what I call the 2000s, they feel symbolic, but it really isn't when you think about it. And it does have an effect on how we react to things. And we feel like we're doing something special because the number itself, 2000, makes it feel like we're in significant times, right? So 2024 feels more dramatic, or being in the year 2000 feels more dramatic than being in the year 1700s, is basically what I'm arguing. And I believe that the 1900s or the 20th century, which is the same thing, were a very inspirational time, precisely because people in the 1900s were motivated by the number, okay? They were actually motivated by the 1900s, almost being to the year 2000. And for them, it felt like it was a time of growth and discovery. And I believe it may have had this compounding effect, which it did historically. It was a very productive, perhaps the most productive in all of humanity, perhaps ever, but we'll see about that. But as we've approached the 2000s, okay, or the 2000s, have you noticed we've had the opposite effect? So I've seen that over time, not only have we become more complacent and propped ourselves up as being sort of the beneficiaries of all this knowledge that came beforehand, and needing to further and not needing, as if we don't need to further or advance anything anymore. And also, but as a society, we've begun to think that we don't need to do more because we've reached sort of the pinnacle, right? That we've reached a point of totality and completion. And we can see this in the arts. So with the slowing down of music, right, and sort of artistic movements, right? When was the last time we've had a unique artistic movement that is significant and that feels different than what, that feels different, right, than what we've seen before? Because, we've had modernism and then we have postmodernism, okay? Post means after. So whenever they say like postmodernism, that means after whatever, right? Post. So a lot of artists seem more eager to try making or redoing past efforts. Okay, so today we do see people kind of doing the throwbacks, right? Doing things that were done before, in the Renaissance, Renaissance style, or maybe, most artists today, I notice that they tend to just do something that's already been done before. So whether it's, let me do something that's similar to the Renaissance or something similar to the, abstract art or modern art, or so, it's 2024, and, with the use of generative AI, people can make pictures quickly. But, these pictures are usually, they need to be qualified, right? You need to explain it to the computer. And so in all cases, you would describe it in terms of artistic movements that are already recognized and popularized. So that means that you when you write an art, right, when you're saying, hey, make me a painting, if you go to AI, right, if you're using AI to make a painting, you would say, hey, AI, can you make something that is impressionistic? Or can you make something in the style of, tribalism or whatever style you want? And so you have to describe it, but there's a limit, right? There's a finite limit. Most people aren't creating something completely different. Now that's just the tools that people are using, right, in terms of computers. But what about the creation itself, right? So as humans, right, we can create something different. So for actual artists, okay, so let's say you are an artist and you have an empty canvas, right? I would argue that we have seen a slowdown of new art styles. And you might think, well, every art style has been done. And I don't know that that's true. I think that a new artist can come up with a new art style that AI wouldn't know about or is unfamiliar with, right? And that it's not documented yet because it hasn't been created yet. So what I'm saying though is, when are we going to get a new art movement, right? Like you could count, I mean, I actually would count the cartoon styles of the 90s and early 2000s, right? Like The Simpsons or SpongeBob SquarePants. Those are kind of like new art styles, I would say, because they are made in unique style, very unique styles. And even, and now, of course, one thing I've noticed is that a lot of these cartoons from the 2020s, okay, the new cartoons that are coming out now, they'll do like a throwback or reimaginings of, cartoons that are similar to Powerpuff Girls, for example. I see that being emulated a lot. Or even older cartoons where they kind of, try to make it look like the Flintstones or something. But is that really creativity, right? I mean, they could be coming up with a new cartoon style, right? So instead of coming up with a new cartoon style, they're kind of doing throwbacks, right? So that's what we're doing now. And, the same can be said of music, right? Like what's the kind of music that we're listening to today, right? Where, we're not seeing the episodic unfolding of musical genres that we saw before and styles based on decades or any other timeline. But instead, we've reached a point where music from the 2020s sound pretty much the same as they did 20 years ago. Either that or they're throwbacks to earlier styles, but they're not coming up. I don't hear new musical genres, right? I'm not hearing the new musical genres. So that's what I'm talking about here. And this is not just happening in the artistic world either. I believe that it's also happening at an intellectual level. And what I mean by that is that as a society, the very boundaries of human knowledge are being set, and we're acting as if we know what we're meant to know, or that we already understand everything. And I think this couldn't be further from the truth. The turn of events that have happened in American and world history it's a very specific timeline where numerous other outcomes could have happened instead of what actually happened, right? What's popular and what is successful and what we consider to be normal may not be so normal after all, right? What we take for granted, all of our cultural norms, it's just random. The ideas we have and the way we express ourselves they're random and could have easily been something else if historical events had just gone differently. When one culture or nation succeeds, it extends its influence, and this affects history. But if another nation had succeeded, right, instead of what actually happened, things would have happened another way, and we would have taken that as normalcy. It's not hard to understand, but for some reason we tend to forget that our cultural understandings and ideas are also just as subject to the swayings of historical event, just as everything else. It's just like the art movements. and that's less apparent. That's because we take things for granted. We take the words that we speak, for example, in our English language, we take that for granted. We assume that, well, this is just how words are formed, but they're actually not, right? Like the words, there are a lot of things we take for granted. We take for granted, for example, that the words are the way they are, that everything, that even that genres are separated the way they are, that categories, the categories that we have, that the way that we separate language, the way that we separate our thoughts are very specific and don't have to be that way. I believe like if a lot of it is just an accident. The way that we say, the words that we say, the things that we think are ideas that people have thought about. And it's not hard to understand, but, somebody came up with the concepts that we have, right? Our concept of love, our concept of, how we organize ourselves and the very ideas that we think. When you go to Japan, for example, they'll have words that describe something that doesn't exactly match anything in English, and that just shows you how a different way of thinking about things. And so there are different, if you can imagine this, but just as there are different art movements that haven't been discovered, there are different words that haven't been discovered. And I wish, in a weird way, that, obviously we have different concepts, and it may not be worth discovering, but still, I think it's weird that today we tend to come up with slang terms that just reinvent what we already know. But really, I wish that we would come up with, if you're going to come up with an idea or term, why not come up with something that doesn't already have a word for it? You know what I mean? So we take language for granted, and the ideas that we have for language itself, it's very limited, to be honest with you. And I would say that it limits our thinking, believe it or not. Like, we could be so much more. I would imagine perhaps some other form of life, right? Some other life form would probably have, perhaps it could potentially have a different way of thinking about things. And so, for example, the people who live in the Arctic region, right, upwards where there's a lot of snow and there's not much, there's no vegetation, there's not. So it's a very, where they have dozens of words, different words for snow. Like they'll have, because they're always surrounded by snow, in Arctic, someone living in that region, a traditional person, they would see things, they would be able to notice details that we wouldn't notice, and things that are relevant to them that are not relevant to us. But it shows, like I said, this idea that language is a reflection of who we are and of what has happened, and that's random, right? So every group of humans has had different circumstances, different things that they value. So while in English, we don't have that many words to describe snow, but this helps illustrate how different cultures express themselves differently according to what is important and relevant to them. So complexity, it is limitless, is what I'm saying, because in my view, because time is limited, and also the complexity of any one, what I'm trying to say is, complexity is limitless from a universal standpoint. But because the time that we spend, when we're here, you're a human, right? We don't live forever. So our time is limited. And so that means that humans, generally speaking, they're not going to go all the way when it comes to anything. There's a limit to what you can discover. And so most cultures, they'll go a certain distance, but then they won't go all the way. And so it takes another group to go somewhere else. And that's why, we combine our efforts, right, through cultural exchange or whatever. But the thing is, the complexity. So what this means is that, generally speaking, because time is limited, most of us, we don't want to spend the rest of our lives just thinking about one issue. And so we have to be grateful for the people who do take the time to, whoever took the time to start inventing written language or oral language or whatever it is. Somebody, took the time to organize these things. And so, the complexity of any society is limited in that sense. So every society is limited. Every culture is limited to some extent. They're limited because because people just don't have time. There's a limit to what people are willing to do, and we don't have all the time in the world to learn everything, right? So in my view, I think from a universal standpoint and from a logical standpoint, things are boundless. Like, I think it's infinite. Like, why wouldn't, well, maybe, I don't know if infinite, but it seems limitless, but we don't go all the way because we don't have time. And that's kind of the tragedy. That's kind of the sad aspect about it. But so, what I'm saying is that human knowledge is being stifled and limited by our current ways of thinking. So it's not just time that is stopping us, but also I would say that it's being limited by what I'm talking about right now, this concept of assuming that we don't need any more, right? That's working against, that very idea is working against us. So, and in this part, it is affected, and this is in part, okay, so the reason why the human knowledge is being stifled and limited, and what I'm arguing here is that it is affected by the numerical coincidence of being emotionally attached to the numerical symbolism of the year 2000, and and how special it seems, because really 2000 seems very significant, right? When you think of it, seems like an important year, which it also becomes, also because of technologically, right? It seems like we've reached a pinnacle. It feels like, right, with all the technology that we've had, and this may be just a sign of a coincidence that we just so happen to we've discovered so much. Like, we've been to the moon, and like, absolutely, we've made big strides, and so now we almost don't, we kind of just want to relax. As a society, we feel like we don't need to do any more. And so technologically, it seems like we've reached a pinnacle, okay, the highest peak, right? We feel like we're on top of the world. We have computers, we have access to so much information, we have a broad and clear picture of our history, okay? Now, it's not a complete picture, in my opinion, but it's, we have a pretty good picture. We have quite a bit of understanding of of history and where we come from. But, are we really at the end of the road? Have we reached the highest reaches of humanity? And I would argue that not. We have not. What that means is that humanity must continue to push forward in order to advance the cause of intellectualism and to go explore new ideas. I don't think we're anywhere near filling the capacity of what is capable of human thinking. In fact, human thinking and the potential of the mind could be almost limitless, in my view. It could be infinite. That is the power of the human brain. And certainly the number 2000 means nothing really in the grand scheme of things. But in terms of opening our minds and realizing what is possible and what art and music and terminologies and writing, could be, literature, there is still a lot left to be uncovered. There are still many books that could be written, We're not anywhere near writing all the stories that could be told. So many concepts that I haven't seen in movies, right? Or in books. But in order to do this, we need a populace, we need a population that is ready and willing to learn and take on the intellectual challenges in the same way that that the many centuries of human thinking have led us to where we are today. And I would argue that we are resting in our laurels and accepting complacency. And by doing so, we may be adapting our minds to not think as much. I've talked about this concept before. There's another video that I have where I talk about this. The idea of, that our brains, they don't know what is important. They think everything is important. I think that's the title of the video. It's on my channel. And our brains, they don't know what is important or not. And if we stop thinking for ourselves, then our brains are going to, collectively, we're going to start losing the ability to think critically. Because genetically, our bodies will think we have no need for it. So just like bees and ants have no need for, they don't need for anything outside of their hive mentality, humans could revert to this more simplistic way of looking at things. And so what that means is that we could actually become, and it's not even better or worse, because some people think, well, everything always gets better, but not necessarily. Like over time, it's not that it gets better or worse. It's just that our brain doesn't know the difference, right? If our brain sees that, well, you don't need to, you don't need to think critically. You don't need to have that spark of imagination and originality and uniqueness. Well, then if you don't need that, well, then your brain might stop doing that. And imagine if we lived in a humanity where that somehow what makes us human, that gets lost somehow. I'm kind of proposing this idea that it could get lost. Like, what if we reverted? Because we're taking for granted that humans are always these, original and creative people. And I would argue maybe not. Maybe not everyone is creative. And if we keep going down this road, we might stop being creative. So, we could revert or even convert. Convert meaning, where our brains could change itself, the structure, to the point where it might be better, where we might be sort of a more servient and non-thinking class of living creatures that become completely reliant on computers. And even in the long term, that may not be sustained, and we could lose the abilities we have now. So even though we may be able to use computers, it doesn't mean that we are thinking critically, right? And we see this with humans all the time, right? Like young people who are not, creating, or young people who could barely talk, like they can still use technology and computers. Like imagine if we had a society where people just use computers and don't have to think anymore, right? So we could start losing the abilities, and the ability to think and criticize and analyze and learn from scratch are absolute necessities to what makes the modern human, with all of its advancements, possible. So now, I will say that just as today, I think we're losing our abilities to think freely, that also goes to show that for most of human history and in many cultures, there may be a prevalence for non-thinking and conformity because so this may already be happening. This may just be normal. But I mean, if this happened at a large scale or complete scale, then, that would be the end of it. That would be the end of creativity. And Now the reason why you might ask, well, how is this happening now? And the way it's happening now is that, the brain is plastic at youth, I believe, and it hardens as you get older. And by harden, I mean that you can't change it as quickly. So it's possible that generations of people may grow up in situations where their minds have already they've molded themselves into being more subservient and not being used to using all of the faculties of their free thinking independence. So we're seeing this now in some areas, but I think it could become even more prevalent, and perhaps the ability to think consciously and think in abstract and complex ways could even be lost over time if in large mass we stop using it. So if schools just become a place where we type AI prompts, okay, to have AI do all of the thinking for us, that, our brains will shut off from thinking, right? In the same way that if you don't walk, or if you wear shoes that don't allow you to run, you're going to lose the ability to run. Believe it or not. You should try. I've had that happen to me. I had to relearn how to run because I spent years wearing shoes and I didn't run. And my shoes kind of didn't allow me to run. So they were pretty comfortable, but I never ran. So, and the shoes kind of, how shoes, some shoes are not designed to run with. Well, anyway, eventually I wanted to run and I couldn't do it because I lost the ability that my brain, it's almost like the connections were lost, or maybe the connections were there, but from a physical standpoint, I couldn't do it. But then, the same could happen at a mental level, because I think muscles and the mind are similar. And so, our brains could shut off thinking. And, the spark, that firework, that energy that goes off in our brain when we're thinking, it'll stop doing it. Because, and that's how I describe it. When we come up with ideas, there's something magical that happens. And if you don't practice that, we might lose that ability. And I think the ability to have that spark, the ability to be able to think of something that wasn't there before, that didn't exist before, that's something that makes us uniquely human. I don't think that animals can do it in the same way we do. And so, thinking independently is actually very taxing, and it's an arduous activity. And I can say that from experience. As someone who has created original things and does it, I can tell you it's hard, and it hurts your head, actually. And I would imagine, takes up energy. And so, actually, the brain probably doesn't want to do it. And isn't that crazy? Like, the brain doesn't want... So there's actually an incentive to not be creative. So that's kind of the danger. It's more hard work. It's easier to just sit back and not think. And so our brain would prefer it, perhaps. But what makes the reason why it's important to think for yourself is because when you think for yourself, when you have the sparks of imagination, you're more likely to succeed. So there is an advantage to being creative and to having that ability to think on your own. And so, thinking is taxing. But if you eliminating that from our learning process, okay, and imagine if we no longer think for ourselves when we go to school, when we go to schools or universities, this could cause a reversal of human thinking and human potentiality. So our minds are not born being intelligent. I don't think. It grows into what we think intelligence is. And I think the limit is probably something that, of course, is has been pushed by humanity, right? But if you keep someone, but at the same time, it's not a given that someone is automatically intelligent. So if, let's say, let me give a scenario. For example, if you keep someone isolated, right? If someone is born and they are kept isolated and they're illiterate, right? And they can't speak or talk or read, right? That's what illiterate means, right? So they're going to live a very different existence than what we would think of as a normal human existence, right? Even unimaginable. But everything, so much of what we are is dependent on the kind of being raised in a, some form of structure that we've created for ourselves. Because otherwise, the brain could very well allow a human to just be, forget it, not even like animals. I mean, worse than an animal, right? Like if you, even animals have some level of structure to them. And so imagine if you had no structure at all, your brain would not know. And even though you might be extraordinary, right? Even if somebody were isolated and illiterate and, somehow didn't have contact with other humans, they would still be extraordinary. The brain would absolutely be, firing in all sort of the brain would still be functioning and in all its complexity, but it would be extraordinary only in that solitary world of illiteracy, if you can imagine that. And so humans have, for many millennia, developed the ability to think rationally and build societies and social systems and a language that is conducive to growth. And specifically, our societies, they have fostered the idea of independence and critical thinking. Sort of the ability to say, what is critical thinking? Critical thinking is being able to think for yourself, being able to question something, being able to say, well, wait a minute, maybe that's not, maybe we want to try something else, right? Like critical thinking, that's a whole other topic. There's so much you could say about that, but for this video, I mean, you can research more about what that is, but I can talk about that another time. But let's get back to this. So I believe the ability to think and come up with new ideas and look at old things and build upon them and creating new genres and constructs and systems are all a part of what has made humans what they are today, because of the few people who took the time throughout history to learn, discover, and apply their own talents by the sweat of their brows. Okay, so I'm talking about these, inventors throughout the years. There is still so much, but I believe that there's still so much to invent and create. So don't just let computers and what is being shown to you be the ultimate reality. Create your own system and genre of art and thinking. Create your own way of thinking. Create your own ideas and conceptualizations. Go further than where we've gone before. Don't rest and think we've made it, because we're nowhere near being finished. The possibilities are endless. This is really about saying that humans need to push their intellectual boundaries further. Humans need to be the one to expand. We can use tools, but those tools still need to be used through the lens of critical thinking and creativity, and with the vision of coming up with new solutions and ideas. Obviously, this speaks on many topics, and I'm not proposing that everything be new either, that we constantly be reinventing the wheel. It's important to understand what came in the past and try to analyze, why things are done. Okay, so, and essentially the solution, I think, is to just always be open-minded and honest enough to accept what could be right from the past and accept what could be possible for the future. But that is always going to be subject to interpretation, and we can only try our best. That's what you'll find too. What you'll find too is that you think of things and you tend to go down one path, but you might not expect to go down. You go down a path you might not expect to go down, but if you try to be honest with yourself, I believe you can find the truth or something close to it or closer to it. So, to reiterate or to repeat, humans have so much potential, okay? And I really do think that as humans, we need to learn to build and create just like the previous creators did from the past. We've seen their examples, right? Just like Einstein and Mozart and everyone else who created things from scratch. We can do that too. And it's time to advance human thinking. So that's why I wanted to talk about this, because as humans, I feel like we are starting to forget. We're starting to take things for granted, and we're starting to think that we know it all. And there is still so much to learn. We need to create new music genres. We need to be creating new art movements. New ways of thinking, or not thinking, but new ways of analyzing things in unique perspectives. And it might not be better or worse or more correct, but it'll just be different, and it's still worth listening to. It's still worth experiencing. I want to see new things, and of course there are some things that probably make sense from the past. Everything doesn't have to be reinventing the wheel, or I'm not saying that either. So it's like I said, you can still have the base knowledge and at the same time be coming up with new. We're talking more about creative endeavors here, and also the idea that technology is going to require this, in my opinion, because technology, I think, could be so much more than what it is today. So even as impressed as we are with technology, we could be so much more, but that's not going to happen if humans become lazy and stop thinking. And imagine the worst case scenario is that we lose the ability to think, because if computers become too easy, or if computers start doing all the heavy lifting, we might lose our brain muscles in the same way that if somebody were to sit on an electric scooter, right, on a mobility scooter, if somebody were to sit there, you would lose your ability to walk, right? Your muscles would weaken. And in the same way, your brain muscles need to be used. So you can't just let a computer do all the creative heavy lifting. Like, you have to be extending. And I'm telling you, it's hard. Like, it hurts. It hurts because I've done it, and I can say what it's like. So that's why it's so important that humans continue to do this. And in fact, I encourage humans to avoid using computers for creative endeavors. You could use it as a tool, sure, or maybe for a job, but really try to understand and be just like the humans of before, because when they did it for real. And you're going to have to do your homework. And what I mean by that is you're going to have to do the work. There's no way around it. And if we do that, I believe that that we can go back to being creative, and we can go back to creating new music genres, new inventions, and the world and humanity will continue to advance. So thank you for watching.